Okay, so as Amy said, good morning everyone, or I guess good afternoon now. Today's presentation is on edible landscaping, and we're going to talk about adding edibles to our lawns and also landscaping with permaculture, and we've got a few other topics that just has a very brief introduction. To begin with edible landscaping, what is it? We have edible landscaping refers to using the edible plants as elements in your lawn or garden. Some examples include fruit and nut trees, berry bushes, vegetables, herbs, edible flowers, and the list goes on and on. Basically, if you can eat it, you can include it in an edible landscape. And it's also important to remember that you don't have to go all out on your edible landscaping. You can start with one tiny little edible plant and you can grow up from there. So we're going to talk about a few reasons why would we want to do edible landscaping. Well, for one, you can enjoy foods that you grow yourself. That is always very rewarding when you can go out into your yard or garden and pick something that you have started from either a seed or a transplant, and now you can eat what you've grown. You can increase food security for your home, which in this time is very important. I know not so much around here, I don't think, but other areas, some places they've ran out of food, and this would give you an avenue to have food if something like that, God forbid, ever was to happen. We can use varieties that are both beautiful and functional. A lot of people just put straight ornamentals in their lawns. This means we can put beautiful edibles and we can have them work for us instead of us working for their beauty. We can grow unusual varieties that are not available in stores, such as pawpaws or persimmons, or I'm sure there's a very extensive list, but that's a way to get access to something that you normally don't have access to. Also, growing your own is good for the environment because it cuts down on fossil fuels used to transport the edibles from wherever they're grown to your table. And finally, and most important, I think, is it's fun. Why not try it? Okay, to get started, we need to evaluate our site. We have to consider some of the following issues. Climate. Make sure that you know your USDA plant hardiness zone and choose plants that will grow in that zone. Lee County, which is where we are at, is in zone 6B. I'm not sure about the others, but it's easy enough to Google USDA plant hardiness zone and the map will come up and you can look from there. Sunlight. Most edibles need at least 6 hours of sun during the day to grow and produce well. Some plants actually need more like 8 or even more than that. But just make sure you're not planting somewhere there's going to be perpetual shade. And soil type. Almost all edibles prefer fast draining soil with organic matter in it, but they can vary by the pH. If you are concerned about your soil, or even if you're just curious, you can have a soil test done through the extension office. I'd have to refer to Amy, but I believe it's around $10 in Lee County. Is that right, Amy?
It's $10 in the state of Virginia for home gardeners.
Okay, I thought it was something like that. So those are some things to keep in mind. And choosing plants that work in your space, you have to consider the mature size of the plant. You can start with a little baby zucchini, and if you don't leave it room to fully mature, it's going to be crowded out and probably become diseased. You have to consider the time and care that you've got to put into caring for your plants. You have to consider watering schedules, fertilizing schedules, and even pest management. You also want to consider the use. How are you going to use these vegetables? You want to plan your garden to have fresh fruits and vegetables all year round, and take into account when you're going to harvest and have a plan to do something with the harvest. Extras should be given away or preserved, to minimize waste. We don't want to grow all this food and have it come in and then not have anything to do with it. And finally, appearance. If you love the appearance of a specific ornamental, you may be able to come up with something that mimics it. The example that one of the sites I was using gave is, if you like the drama of a Japanese maple, try a black elderberry. It has beautiful lacy black leaves. It's not exactly the same, but the drama is still there, and it's still very beautiful, and you can actually eat the elderberry. Okay, in order to plan our edible designs, we want to start by brainstorming. And most people know when you brainstorm, you want to jot down all ideas, even if they're not going to be practical in the end. One suggestion is to keep a journal with pictures, diagrams, cloth swatches, whatever inspires you. And that way you can take it to the store and talk to the salespeople, and they will know exactly what you're asking them for. We also need to consider the placement in the yard. This is what we were talking about with climate and stuff. You have to also make sure that there's going to be ample room to maneuver, to mow around if it's in your yard.
On the floor with what were on your chair.
You can walk the area and add physical markers to test your ideas, or you can stake out where you want a flower bed to be placed using sticks and some string, or even lay out a water hose where the bed will be placed. And there's an example of a beautiful edible garden. Again, the conditions. You want to pick out the best spots for probably fruit trees or the garden, the annual vegetables. Rocky areas can be good for herb plantings. Some perennials, such as watercress, grow in perpetually damp soil. So just make sure that you're not planting, for example, most herbs like to be well drained. You wouldn't want to plant that in a damp spot. And when you're finally satisfied, make a scale drawing of your yard and add the features in to make sure everything looks exactly what you want it to look like. Okay, there's quite a lengthy section on what types of plants we can use, so we're just going to kind of touch on it a little bit. But the types of plants you can use, herbs of course. Most herbs grow well in a flower bed or pots near your house. You can mix them in with flowers, or you can plant them around the base of a mailbox. Just use your imagination. There's so many places you can plant herbs. And one of my favorite things is to plant them intermixed in your garden, because certain herbs have insect repelling qualities. You can use greens. Greens look nice growing in a flower bed, and some that are called greens are also very colorful. They're not actually green, such as rainbow chard or red jewel cabbage. They're beautiful even without flowering. Perennial vegetables. Some veggies, such as rhubarb and asparagus, are perennial and come back year after year. You can use these plants to ease the work of replanting every single year, and they'll still be there. We have edible flowers. Nasturtiums, violas, pansies, borage, and calendula all have edible blossoms. You can cook and eat the buds, blossoms, and tender shoots of daylily plants. Or this was interesting. I did not know you could do this, but you can eat the tubers from daylily plants. Vining plants, they can be grown in a decorative trellis. Scarlet runner beans are popular because they're pretty, but any type of vine bean, peas, a squash, cucumbers, tomatoes, grapes, etc. will grow. You can use those in your landscape. Fruit-bearing shrubs are nice. You have blueberries, currants, gooseberries, and they look pretty and functional both. They're not just ornamental. Some shrubs will be small and low to the ground. Others can reach 5 to 6 feet tall. Fruit and nut trees, they provide shade like oaks and maples, but they also provide food. And in addition to fruits that you're very familiar with, such as apples, peaches, and pears, this is what I was talking about. You can grow pawpaws, which are unusual and you can't find them in stores. Again, the lists that I'm going to give you are not inclusive. You can grow whatever you like. You just arrange them in a visually pleasing manner and call it edible landscaping. Okay, this is the section I was talking about that's really long, so I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it. But the reason I put all this in is because I'm going to share the presentation with anyone who wants it. My contact information is at the end, and you can just simply give me an email or get in touch with Amy and we'll get you a copy of the presentation. But the edible plants, shrubs, and trees, we have apple trees, apricots, black elderberry, which is native. That's the one I showed a picture of earlier. It has pretty black leaves. The fruit can be used for jelly, syrup, and wine. We also have figs. A lot of people think figs don't grow in this area, but there are certain varieties that do. The three I've listed are Hardy Chicago. I believe that's pronounced Negron, or Olympian fig varieties. Or you can plant the fig in a large container and move it indoors during cold weather. We have peaches, pears. Again, persimmons are native. Plums are an interesting choice. They can be green, gold, red, or purple. They don't have a lot of problems either. There's a picture of the persimmon that came in. I don't know if you all have ever tried them, but they're very unusual fruits to my palate. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with eating them or not, but it would be a good tree to try in your landscape. Okay, some shrubs we have. Blueberries, currants, and gooseberries. Currant and gooseberries are better used in jams and jellies, although I believe you can eat them just off the vine, but I believe they're kind of tart. Huckleberries are beautiful with bronze foliage. We have rhubarb. They say leaves are poisonous, so only eat the stems if you're growing rhubarb. And tomatoes. I know this is not technically a shrub, but it is an appropriate size for the category. It's an annual, so you'd have to replant it each year, but who doesn't love a fresh tomato, or in this area, a nice tomato sandwich? Vining plants we can use. We have grapes, kiwi. Hardy kiwi is, it's very, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. It's very prolific. It grows quite a bit of fruit, but you have to have both a male and a female to produce. They actually have new, smaller, self-fertile varieties, but I'm not very familiar with those. We would have to Google to find out what exactly those are. We have raspberries. Marionberry, I thought this was interesting. It's a blackberry that does not grow out of control, because if you're familiar with blackberries, they can quickly take over an area if they're left unchecked. But this was developed at OSU, and you have to use a special technique to train the berry canes onto wires. And we have cucumbers. They make a lovely black background for other plants. They do need a lot of water, and you can get bush varieties that don't climb if you prefer not to have it vining out in a very large area. Some ground covers we have are strawberries, lettuce, kale, and Swiss chard. And this up here is a picture of Swiss chard. I think it's so pretty with all the different colors. Okay, the edible herbs. Most of the herbs you grow are edible. Some are medicinal, so they can serve more than one purpose. We have angelica, catnip. You should keep in mind catnip is a member of the mint family, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times throughout this section. Mints can get out of control very quickly if you let them grow in, say, your garden. They're best controlled if you grow them in a pot or, say, a 5-gallon bucket or something like that. Chamomile, chives, cilantro. Cilantro leaves are, apparently they taste like green, according to my sister, but they're a nice addition. We have dill. Everybody loves dill pickles. Well, maybe not everybody, but I do. We have echinacea, which is one of my favorites. I'm trying to grow echinacea this year. It's also known as purple coneflower. Well, Echinacea purpurea is. There's also other varieties, but anyway, it's a medicinal herb and you can eat it. Lavender varieties are English and Grosso that can grow in zone 6. I did want to mention their French and Spanish cousins do not grow well in zone 6. They're for zones 8 through 9. Lavender smells really nice. I'd say most people know that. Lemon balm is another, I believe, in the mint family. Marjoram, it can be used to treat coughs and sore throats. Here's mint again. There's so many varieties, but most of them will grow in zone 6, but not all of them. But you can always find a mint variety that you like that will grow. Again, it's a rabid spreader and can overtake areas of the garden. So that can be either good or bad. If you want a lot of mint, that's good. If you don't, you might want to think about planting something different. Oregano, everybody loves Italian food with oregano in it. Parsley is a biennial herb that is either curly-leaved or flat-leaved. Parsley leaves out in the first season and comes back the second season to flower, seed, and die. So once it seeds, you can always collect the seeds and grow more. We have rosemary, sage, tarragon, and thyme. And of course, there's probably other edible herbs. Again, the lists are not all inclusive, but it does give you a brief overview of some herbs we can eat. Now the flowers, there's quite a few of these as well. I'll just touch on a few of them. Bee balm, I don't know if you knew you could eat bee balm. I did not until I was doing my research for this presentation. Calendula is a type of marigold. They're peppery, tangy, and spicy. Sorry, wrong way. We have chamomile, cilantro flowers. Dandelion is one of my favorite. Actually, I am trying to make dandelion jelly right now. They are a great source of vitamin K, vitamins A and C. They have vitamin E, folate, and small amounts of other B vitamins. Also, they provide lots of iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And I found a source that said dandelion is one of their top 20 most nutritious foods. So don't think of it as just a weed when it's in your yard. Think of it, maybe I could eat that. We have fuchsia. Fuchsia is both gorgeous and apparently tasty. Hibiscus, hollyhock, Johnny jump ups. These are little pansies, I believe. They're adorable and they have a subtle mint flavor. So, okay, we have lavender, mint, nasturtium, oregano. There's just so many. Pansies, radishes, rose, sage, squash, and pumpkin I thought was interesting. I did not know that you could eat their blossoms, but they're apparently very good to have them stuffed, and they have a slight squash flavor. And violets. If everybody gets these little purple flowers in the yard like I do, they're very useful because you can eat them and you can make wild violet jelly, which I made that here a few days ago. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about permaculture. Permaculture is designing things that are sustainable systems for people. Sustainability is measured by whether or not a system captures and stores more energy over its lifetime than was required for the system to be created and maintained. Applied to our gardens, permaculture is a design system which is intended to copy patterns and relationships in nature, while at the same time providing food and energy for the owner. Okay, so what about permaculture gardening? Permaculture gardening means permanent agriculture, and it's defined as working with natural forces such as the wind, the sun, and water to provide food, shelter, water, and everything else your garden needs other than the plants and the seeds. The best part is that it's all done with the least amount of labor and without destroying the land. Simply put, permaculture gardening is a holistic approach to gardening. Some things to consider when we start doing gardening with permaculture. We have to pay attention to things like sun patterns and moisture levels that naturally occur. We talked a little bit about this before, but we didn't define it as permaculture. Again, you wouldn't want to plant herbs in a very moist area or something that, like the watercress, we wouldn't want to plant that in a dry, rocky area. We can also highlight or block views as needed. So if we have a beautiful mountain scene somewhere, we want to highlight that. But if we have maybe neighbors with an ugly fence, we can kind of block out the fence with some of our gardening. We want to think outside the box when we decide what to plant. What is already growing in our yards that we can harvest without any extra effort? Again, have you tried dandelion greens, bittercress, or chickweed? When we plant our garden, we want to map out the space and consider the existing conditions. Choose plants for the right place so you're not fighting against nature but working with it. And be open to feedback and to changes. The first time we plant our garden with permaculture, we may not get things right. If something is not growing well in a particular area, we may need to make some changes. We also need to use resources we already have at our disposal. For example, can our chickens help clean up a bed after harvest and also help to fertilize the garden? We can plant legumes to help make nitrogen more available and use cover crops instead of leaving the garden bare in the winter. We can also compost in place. Some ways to reduce waste, I apologize. We can compost, we can reuse wood chips from local sawmills to mulch with. We want to plant native species so we don't have to constantly water. We can capture rain in a rain barrel so we're not wasting our water out of our taps. We can plant more food crops or pollinator plants instead of having a lawn. There's so many things we can do. Another thing is each item should perform more than one function and each system should have a backup. We want to plant multiple varieties to ensure a harvest even if one type doesn't produce. Use companion planting techniques in this. We'll talk about companion planting in just a minute, but we want to select older, heirloom, or uncommon plant varieties. And finally, we want to create areas where we can maximize the merging of plant and animal communities, such as planting an herb or pollinator garden alongside the vegetable garden, or we can try building a food forest. Some vital features of permaculture gardening: we want soil preservation. So we're using things like mulching, composting, and cover crops. We want to use plant stacking. Well, that's what we were talking about with the food forest. We'll talk more about that in a second. But it's got all these layers that we can get a plant that fits into, and that way we can put more plants in a space than we would otherwise be able to. We also want to practice succession planting, which gives us multiple crops, and we always have something growing, so it helps protect the land. And finally, we want to use companion planting to stimulate growth, repel pests, and attract beneficial insects. And this is a sample of a food forest. The very tallest layer are large fruit and nut trees. The lower tree layers are dwarf fruit trees, or depending on the size of our nut trees, it could be a standard size fruit tree. We have shrubs, which is berry bushes and other useful shrubs. We have the herbaceous level, which is flowers, herbs, and vegetables. The soil surface, we have low-growing ground covers. We have a root layer with fungi and root vegetables. And finally, we have a vertical layer, which is our climbing plants. And a sample for what we could do in Lee County, our top layer may be a pecan tree. Then we have a dwarf apple tree. Next, we have a blueberry bush. Our layer 4, we have chamomile, purple coneflower. Basically, any herbs or normal garden vegetables would fall into this category. Layer 5, our ground cover is strawberries. Layer 6, our root layer, I've got carrots, beets, turnips. We could try mushrooms if it's a very moist, shady area. And finally, we can try our vines for grapevines or hardy kiwi. So we want to talk a little bit about companion planting. Companion planting is planting your garden based on the needs and requirements of plants and their symbiotic relationships with other plants and insects. The most famous companion planting, which we probably all have heard of, is the Three Sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. The corn will provide a support for the beans provide nitrogen for the corn, and the squash provides a natural mulch, keeping the ground moist as corn does not enjoy dry soil. For companion planting, we want to take advantage of the space by planting the vegetables according to the space required to grow. For example, if you're growing tall peppers, carrots can grow underneath the leaves and stuff. Also, you can use a tall plant to provide shade for other plants if it's needed. We have nutritional requirements. We want to plant nitrogen replacing beans and peas near greens that need a lot of nitrogen to grow. And there's other examples, that's just one. And we want to attract predatory insects that will prey on pests. And we want to attract pollinators. So, for example, we may plant ladybug attracting plants like calendula near aphids such as citrus trees or peppers. And colors and smells. Interplanting some strong herbs and brightly colored flowers can help confuse pests. And planting white violas around your brassicas can help reduce cabbage moth. Here we just have a list of some plants that are good for insect repelling. To get rid of cabbage moth, for example, we can try hyssop, mint, oregano, rosemary, sage, southernwood, tansy, or thyme. Flies, we can plant basil or rue. We have mosquitoes, they're repelled by basil and rosemary. And these are just examples. And again, I'm going to give you my contact information at the end so you can get this information for yourself if you'd like it. Okay. If we go to the link listed below, here is a companion planting chart. It gives us examples of plants that grow well together and plants that we should not plant together, along with bug control. The orange says carrots will grow with good flavor, but they'll have stunted roots, so I don't know if you want to try that or not. And we also have a category that says beneficial to the garden in general. So for example, if we're going to plant some broccoli, we can plant next to beans, carrots, chives, the list goes on, but we wouldn't want to plant broccolis next to peppers, squash, strawberries, or tomatoes. And if we plant oregano next to the broccoli, it helps repel bugs. So to put it all together, you can add some of these techniques together to make this year's garden a great one. Don't forget to spend time perusing the examples of companion planting, as this can reduce and even alleviate the need for pesticides and can actually help your plants be healthier and more disease resistant. There's no limit to the uniqueness, functionality, and beauty that creative gardening techniques can add to your personal landscape. I hope you all have enjoyed the presentation and have picked up a few techniques to use along the way. There is no right or wrong way to take on an edible landscaping project. It can be as little as one edible plant added into your lawn, all the way up to having a 100% edible landscape, and it will still be useful and delicious. Edible landscaping is a wonderful way to add interest, beauty, and function to your yard. You can do this in addition to or in place of a traditional garden, or you can add in other techniques to make your yard truly your own. Why not give it a try today? Mother Nature and your tummy will thank you. And there's a list of some references I've used. Now, does anyone have any questions?
I do have 2 comments just real quick. You mentioned the wood chips from a local sawmill. I just want people to know, don't use fresh wood chips. Put them aside and let them age for a year. Now at the sawmill, they may have been there for a year, but ask and make sure how long they've been there. Fresh wood chips tie up nitrogen, and you can end up with nitrogen deficiency. So they need to age for about a year is usually what we say. And then the second thing is about the different
Okay,
berries.
thank you, honey.
Some of the berries, they have come up with a lot of new varieties, and a lot of people don't realize, but like the blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, they have come up with so many new varieties, and sometimes they're not in like burpees. They may be in some different places you might be able to find them, but they've become coming along really well with especially like blackberries, like she had pointed out, that are really great, better function for us now and not the blackberry that we're used to.